Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is the podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah, and I am happy to be with you on this St. Patrick's Day weekend. Yes, tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day, and I've heard it said that on St. Patrick's Day, many people claim to be a little bit Irish. I am not really. I mean, I guess I could be a teeny tiny, itty bitty tiny little bit. So on St. Patrick's Day, sure, I'll claim that like 0.5% or whatever it is. I should do the DNA test. I've always been interested in that. My parents both did it, so I guess I have an idea of what I would be. But it would be interesting. That's on my list of things to do someday, somewhere along the line. But tomorrow is St. Patrick's Day, and as I said at the end of the episode on Tuesday, I think we're going to travel to, I don't think, we are going to travel to Ireland in the podcast today. I wish we could actually travel to Ireland. That would be lovely. But since I don't have that ability to make this a magical podcast, sorry, I just haven't figured that one out yet. I got to work on my magical abilities. Clearly, I'm failing you as a podcast host, not being able to transport you magically to Ireland. But as we get started, whenever I think of St. Patrick's Day, obviously I think of a lot of things, but there is a cartoon that I see every year that cracks me up, and it's the caption is St. Patrick drives the snakes out of Ireland, and St. Patrick is in a car full of snakes driving the snakes out of Ireland, and the snakes are saying things like, "Are we there yet?" and "I have to go to the bathroom," and being typical like car passenger snakes. And I realize it's a very silly, kind of cheesy little cartoon, and I am a total nerd for admitting this, but I've admitted before that I'm a total nerd, and I'm a bit of a church nerd when it comes to that too. Religious humor, church humor cracks me up, and St. Patrick literally driving the snakes out of Ireland in a car makes me giggle. If that makes me weird, I'm okay with that. But what is the legend behind St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland, besides, of course, him, obviously they didn't have cars, so he couldn't do it in a car. Well, I decided that I would give you the scoop. Some of you already know. Maybe some of you know part of it. There's a website called Ireland Calling. It's about all things Irish, it claims to be, and it's got some legends about St. Patrick, one of which St. Patrick banishes snakes from Ireland, and that legend is as follows. The story goes that St. Patrick had subjected himself to a 40-day fast on the top of the mountain, the mountain now known as, I don't know how to pronounce that word, Croagh, Craig, Patrick. And as Patrick came down after finishing his fast, he saw snakes gathering in front of him. Perhaps the great man was in a bad mood from his fasting, because, angered by the snakes' look of evil and menace, he chased them into the sea and banished them forever. From that day forward, there were no snakes to be found in Ireland. Wow. Tired from a fast, and he still had the energy to chase the snakes into the sea, and the snakes went. However, science says the absence of snakes in Ireland is down to the Ice Age. The theory is that snakes started to migrate northwards from southern Europe as the last Ice Age ended and temperatures rose. They reached as far as Britain, but then melting ice caps created the Irish Sea, making it impossible for them to get to Ireland. No one knows the origin of the story of Patrick and the snakes, but some commentators have speculated that it originated with Irish monks several hundred years ago. The snakes are seen as a symbol of the Druids, the high priests of the pre-Christian world, and in driving out the snakes, St. Patrick is driving out the Druids, and in doing so emphasizes the triumph of Christianity over paganism. So, yeah, you can kind of see how that maybe would have come about. Personally, I just like to think of him, well, if he's not, actually driving them out, just like chasing them toward the sea, I'd like to picture him waving his arms, running after a whole group of snakes because he's hangry, right? And sending them into the sea. If he's not doing that, then I prefer to picture him driving them in the car and being very grumpy because they are making it an annoying kind of road trip. Anyway, that is the legend of St. Patrick banishing or driving the snakes from Ireland. Not sure if you'd ever heard that or not. Some of you, I'm sure, have. Some of you, maybe not. I knew it sort of, but not some of the details. So I found that interesting. Books about St. Patrick's Day, there are a million of them. There are a million books set in Ireland, too. I went down a total rabbit hole again with this episode, and now I want to read every book that's set in Ireland ever, and I want to read them while being in Ireland. Can we do that? As usual, I will talk about a tiny, tiny little drop in the bucket of books that are set in Ireland. That's going to be the focus more than St. Patrick's Day itself, but I do want to start with one St. Patrick's Day because I've talked about this series before, and that is the 'Twas the Night Before series by Natasha Wing, and she's got so many fun 'Twas the Night Before, and she does have one the night before St. Patrick's Day, and it starts out, 'Twas the night before St. Patrick's, the day to wear green. Not a creature was stirring. Yeah, not a creature was stirring except Tim and Maureen. They decked out the den from ceiling to floor with streamers and rainbows and shamrocks galore. Later, they carefully made traps with gold charms and rings. I bet we catch a leprechaun. They love shiny things. For if they caught one, so the legend told, they'd find where he buried his big pot of gold. You'll have to read the rest to find out if they catch a leprechaun. Do you, or did you do it as a child? Do you do it as a family? Does your child do it at school? Do they do leprechaun, pretending to catch a leprechaun or anything on St. Patrick's Day like that? I had one teacher who was my kindergarten and first grade teacher. She moved up to first grade along with my class, and she used to kind of go all out. She had a baby / toddler the 2 years we had her, and she actually dipped the baby's feet in green paint, and then obviously the toddler could walk on her own. She would walk around the classroom the night before, so there were little green footprints, and that was so cool, and she had this whole elaborate story behind the leprechaun and were we going to catch it, and it was a lot of fun. Mrs. Briggs, that was awesome. Thank you. I don't remember all of the details. I just remember thinking it was cool, and I remember my mother telling me later about the baby and the footprints, because when I was in first grade and kindergarten, obviously I thought it was real, that it had to have been a teeny tiny leprechaun instead of a teeny tiny person. So there's lots of books about St. Patrick's Day. The Tommy DePaola has some that explore some of the Christian aspects of St. Patrick's Day. There's all sorts of books about, leprechauns, and even I saw some about the leprechaun traps and those kinds of stories of let's catch the leprechaun. The picture books, younger books, those types of things. I even looked to see if there was a Junie B. Jones book about St. Patrick's Day, because we've talked about those before in terms of specific holidays, and there is not, but apparently there is. Junie B. Jones is a leprechaun, and it is fan fiction. I had no idea that there was fan fiction, Junie B. Jones fan fiction. I don't know why I'm surprised. There's fan fiction for just about everything, but I thought that was fun. I did not, however, read it. I apologize for that. I cannot tell you about it. So if you're interested in Junie B. Jones fan fiction, just Google it. I'm sure you'll find it. In the meantime, we are going to take our first break of the podcast. When we come back, we'll be talking about books set in Ireland as opposed to about St. Patrick's Day. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We're about to talk about books set in Ireland. Before the break, we were talking a little more specifically about St. Patrick's Day. And as you can imagine, there are a million books set in Ireland. That's probably not an exaggeration. We're going to talk today about fiction, novels set in Ireland, as opposed to historical books about Ireland, although that would be fascinating as well. I'm sure there are also a lot of travel books about Ireland. You know, there's got to be just a billion. If we went with million before, let's go with a billion this time about books about Ireland. But we're going to go with fiction today and just have books that are set in Ireland. I could think of many off the top of my head, but of course, once I started looking, then a bunch more came to mind. Some of you may be familiar with the author Maeve Binchy. She has a lot. The one that came up most often was Circle of Friends. And I feel like I've read it, but it's not been since 2007 when I started my list, because it's not on my list. So if I've read it, I don't fully remember it, so not going to talk about that. But Maeve Binchy has multiple novels set in Ireland, and Circle of Friends seems to be the best well-known. Goodreads has a list of like 537 books set in Ireland, so that's just Goodreads. Somebody put together a list of 500, and I think it's 37 or 47. There are a lot. One of maybe a better known book, I'm not sure if I can say that. Anyway, Angela's Ashes is a book set in Ireland, and I did say fiction. This one is a memoir, so I guess I did lie to you, but it popped up on the list, and I had read it probably 20 years ago now. Has been out for 20 years. 1999. So, 20 years this year. So I think I read it shortly after it came out. This is a Pulitzer Prize winning #1 New York Times bestseller. It is by Frank McCourt, and it is a memoir, as I said. When I look back on my childhood, Frank McCourt says, I wonder how I managed to survive at all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. The happy childhood is hardly worth your while. Worse than the ordinary miserable childhood is the miserable Irish childhood, and yet worse is the miserable Irish Catholic childhood. So begins the luminous memoir of Frank McCourt, born in Depression-era Brooklyn to recent Irish immigrants and raised in the slums of Limerick, Ireland. Frank's mother, Angela, has no money to feed the children since Frank's father, Malachi, rarely works, and when he does, he drinks his wages. Yet Malachi, exasperating, irresponsible, and beguiling, does nurture in Frank an appetite for the one thing he can provide, a story. Frank lives for his father's tales of Cuchulainn, who saved Ireland, and of the angel on the seventh step, who brings his mother babies. Yeah, that's not where babies come from. Perhaps it is a story that accounts for Frank's survival. Wearing rags for diapers, begging a pig's head for Christmas dinner, and gathering coal from the roadside to light a fire, Frank endures endures poverty, near starvation, and the casual cruelty of relatives and neighbors, yet lives to tell his tale with eloquence, exuberance, and remarkable forgiveness. Angela's Ashes, imbued on every page with Frank McCourt's astounding humor and compassion, is a glorious book that bears all the marks of a classic. Now, as I said, I read this shortly after it came out. I remember enjoying it, although, enjoy is kind of a relative term because it is dreary. There are times when it is very, very dreary. Frank McCourt also has a book called Tis. Again, if I read it, I can't remember, but that's not what we're just going to stick with Angela's Ashes because I know I read that one. The one thing I remember, and this is just going to solidify my church nerd status, is his first communion when he had his first communion, and then one of the traditions was to go around, and I think they were giving him wine. I could be, anyway, something. He had an empty stomach, had his first communion, had the host placed on his tongue, then there was a celebration where he went around, and anyway, something about this celebration made him throw up. And the way he tells this story is, I remember it as being hilarious that he threw up the body of Christ, and it was, it was bad. He was going to hell, and Irish Catholic. I'm not telling it to its full justice, but I just, that's the part of the book besides the dreariness and kind of the depressing nature of this ghastly poverty that he grew up in, that's the one anecdote that sticks out in my head. And you're probably thinking, yeah, you're a dork. Definite church nerd. That's the part that I just always think about, him throwing up the body of Christ and his grandmother being horrified by him, as though it's his fault, and as though. No, not going to go there. Okay, so that is Angela's Ashes. Not the most uplifting of stories. Another book on the list that I saw was Cecilia Ahern, P.S. I Love You, movie that came out a while back with Gerard Butler and, what is her name? I can picture her. You're probably screaming at the podcast right now. It's her, Hilary Swank. And I read that book, saw the movie, enjoyed the movie. Of course, the movie and the book are different. The book was good. I enjoyed it. It had some funny moments. It had some poignant moments. I think what made me angry was kind of how the dead husband holds the woman hostage. So the husband is dying, knows he's dying, and puts together this whole series of events, letters and different things for after he's gone. And in some ways it's really, really sweet. And in other ways it just holds her hostage. She can't move on. And I just remember thinking, this is awful. She can't, you're dead and you've got this hold over her. So in some ways it was, I definitely had mixed emotions about that one. It is kind of a romance, but it's also, maybe not the healthiest romance, because she is very conflicted throughout the book and sometimes starts to wonder if he really is alive somewhere and this is all some kind of elaborate hoax or joke. And that part kind of bugged me. If you are now screaming at the podcast for different reasons because you loved that book and or you loved the movie, I do apologize. Just, one of those things where I was like, oh, stop that. Books set in Ireland. Nora Roberts seems to love Ireland, and she has many, 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 many books set in Ireland. She tends to write several standalone novels, one or two standalone novels a year, and she's always got either trilogies or a short series of books that also come out. Many of these are set in Ireland. One of the earliest ones that I read was the Born In series, a trilogy, Born in Fire, Born in Ice, Born in Shame. It's about three sisters, and two of whom are Irish, one of whom is American. Not going to tell you why, but three sisters, and it's about their very, very complicated family relationships and takes place in County Clare. Three very different sisters, and don't always get along, but through the trilogy then they start learning more about their past, more about their parents, more about the relationship that they have with each other, and of course they're all romances. I've talked a little bit about Nora Roberts before on the podcast. One thing that I really love about her books is that, you can say that they're predictable, that they maybe are a little formulaic, but what I love about a Nora Roberts book when I pick it up is that I know it's going to have a happy ending. I know everything's going to turn out okay. There's going to be some speed bumps. There's going to be some conflict. But at the end of the story, you're going to get your happily ever after. And you know what? Sometimes I just need that. Sometimes I need to pick up a book and know that it's going to, in some ways, be predictable, that I'm going to be able to say, yeah, this is going to happen. I know where this is headed. But that I also know at the end of the day, I'm going to get my happy ending. Everything is going to be okay. Sometimes in the world, I just need a book where I know that everything is going to be okay. And on that note, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll be talking a little bit more about books set in Ireland. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. We are talking about books set in Ireland. Before the break, I was saying that sometimes I just need to know everything's going to be okay. And I was talking about Nora Roberts' books. She has, I mentioned the Born In trilogy. She also has other trilogies that have they're a little more paranormal, a little more supernatural. Most of her standalone books are not, but a lot of her trilogies are. So there is another one that is set, is it the Dance of the Gods trilogy? There's Morrigan's Cross, there's the Dance of the Gods. I don't actually remember off the top of my head what the trilogy itself is called, or maybe there's 4 in that one. Anyway, that takes place partially in Ireland, partially in other places, but I think the majority of it, a lot of it takes place in Ireland. That one is definitely supernatural, paranormal. There are wizards, witches, time travel, vampires, kind of a whole conglomeration of things, plus a lot of Celtic imagery, a lot of Celtic legends. There's even an alternate, kind of another dimension, another realm, another world that is very, very much like Ireland in that other realm. So part of it takes place in that other realm, part of it takes place in Ireland, but the other realm is very similar to Ireland. And then she has a newer one, and that is Dark. Let's see, there's Dark Witch, and that also takes place in Ireland. Has a lot of supernatural, paranormal in it. The one thing about that one that kind of drove me a little crazy was that she spelled magic with a K. That's just me. It was plural a lot. Blood Magic is one of those. Dark Witch is another of those, and Magic with a K, Magics with a K. It just kind of made me roll my eyes. But that's another one with a lot of supernatural stuff going on. There's always kind of an ancient evil. There's always a legend, good stuff like that. But then you get the romance and you get all of that. There's another one, The Gallaghers of Ardmore, and that is contemporary, as is the one with Magic with a K, contemporary but still there are portions of it, there are parts of it that are supernatural, a little more contemporary. Maybe it's more urban fantasy in ways that is three siblings and they own a bar, and they, again, you've got sibling conflicts and family and also a legend. And some of those are Tears of the Moon, something of the Sun, but there's three of those, and they have to kind of, the three siblings have destinies or fates that are tied to this ancient legend in the place where they live, and each one of them in their various ways fulfills part of that. So that gives you kind of an idea of the Nora Roberts books and where they go. You know, there's always some romance. There's often some magic, whether it is or is not with a K. And then if you go and look, you know, just do your Google search like I always do. There are so many books set in Ireland and so many books that I would love to read set in Ireland. There's a ton of series that appear to be set in Ireland, none of which I have read, but there's some mysteries, lots of fantasy with kind of Celtic roots and Celtic traditions in them, as you can imagine. I just realized that Nora Roberts, not realized, I just remembered or thought of Nora Roberts writing as J.D. Robb has a series. The main character is Eve Dallas. She is a New York cop. It's set in the not too distant future, and Eve's husband Rourke is Irish. I think Nora Roberts definitely has a fascination with Ireland, if her writing is any indication. And there is one book in that series that is set in Ireland. Most of them are set in New York, but they do go to Ireland in one book. And of course, Eve ends up having to solve a murder because that's what she does. And so there is that one as well. But also, even when they're not in Ireland, Rourke is still Irish. So I also thought, this is not a book. I was hoping it was a book and that I could add it to my to-be-read list. But have you ever seen the movie Waking Ned Devine? I love that movie. I just think it is hilarious. It takes place in a very teeny, tiny place in Ireland, and someone has just won the lottery. So the two main characters discover that someone in this teeny, tiny town has won the lottery, and it can only be, there's only like, let's say 30 people. I can't remember the exact number. So they set out to figure out who it was, who won the lottery. And you meet some of the quirky characters that are in this story. And it just, I'm, again, not doing justice in the way I'm telling it. But if you haven't seen it and you enjoy kind of quirky British humor in that way, kind of that dry UK humor, then Waking Ned Devine is a really good thing to watch on St. Patrick's Day. It's got a great soundtrack. It's got a hilarious cast. You're going to recognize a lot of the actors that are in the movie. It's just got some very quirky, silly things, but it's also, you know, it's about relationships and it's about life and community and how people take care of each other, how you live with, you know, in that small of a community, in that small of a place where everybody is in everybody else's business and you maybe don't always get along, and there's the one person that just drives everybody crazy. So it's got a lot of really great characters and exploring of relationships, etc. So not going to tell you who won the lottery. You'll have to watch that for yourself. The phrase fruity soaps makes me laugh whenever I think of that movie. If you've seen it, maybe you know why. If you haven't seen it, still not going to tell you. So, books about Ireland. What are your favorites? Maybe you don't like Ireland. Maybe you don't want to read books set in Ireland. But if you do, I would love to know what your favorites are. I know that there are so many that you're probably sitting there going, I can't believe you didn't mention X, Y, and Z. There's a whole series. I can't believe you didn't mention this. And of course, as I said, this except for the memoir, these were fiction mostly. There are, I'm sure, again, a ton of children's books about St. Patrick's Day. I know that there are a ton of history books. There would be a ton of books about St. Patrick, about the Ireland of St. Patrick's time, or, you know, the Ireland pre-Christianity, the pagan Ireland, and then the Christian Ireland, and just numerous history books. And I'm sure there's many, many fascinating books out there. And probably numerous not so fascinating books as well, but hey, that's just par for the course, right? So what are your favorite books, either about St. Patrick's Day or about Ireland? I would love to hear your thoughts and let me know. So tell me, obviously I missed 99% of the books set in Ireland because this would be an extraordinarily long podcast otherwise, but let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. I hope that you are having a wonderful St. Patrick's Day weekend. If you celebrate, please do so responsibly. I know green beer is a draw, and the results of green beer, which would be green pea in case you didn't know, and drunkenness. Just be careful, okay? Be safe out there. Don't do anything too crazy. Please join me on Tuesday as I will be interviewing author J.B. Jameson about his Emily Graham series. This is a thriller. She is an FBI agent, a thriller series. There are 2 books currently out with a 3rd one on its way, so we will be talking about that series, and I think you will enjoy it. So join me for that on Tuesday. In the meantime, again, have a wonderful, happy, and safe St. Patrick's Day weekend, and if you have the opportunity, go out there and get yourself lost in a good book. Maybe or maybe not set in Ireland. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.